All right, so for today's task, we are working on y-intercepts. Okay, so we will be working on y-intercepts given a graph like the one that you see right now. And then the second part will be solving for y-intercept or determining the y-intercepts given the function or the equation. Okay. All right, so I have six graphs in here, and let's review a little bit on the x-intercepts first. So the x-intercepts, if this is your xy axis and this is your graph, it's the point where your graph crosses the x axis. So that's why they're called x-intercepts. In fact, on graph number one, I have marked all the x-intercepts. On graph B, this is the x-intercept. For C, these are the x-intercepts. You have three of those. For D, you don't have an x-intercept because this graph, the blue graph, does not really reach the x-axis or intersect the x-axis. For graph E, you have multiple x-intercepts. Okay, and then for F, you have one, two, three, four x-intercepts. So those are the x-intercepts. And I want to cover the x-intercepts when we're working on y-intercepts, just so you can see the difference between them. Now, just like the definition of the similar to the definition of the x-intercepts, where it's the point where the graph crosses the x-axis, the y-intercept is where the graph crosses your y-axis. So if this is your y-axis on one, therefore this blue graph crosses it at that point right there. So that is your y-intercept. So what is that point? Well, that is negative 4 comma, or not negative 4 comma 0, but 0 comma negative 4. Okay, that's gonna erase a whole thing, I guess. So that's gonna be 0 comma negative 4. Okay, that's that point right there. Or sometimes we just call it negative 4, depending again on what the question is. If they want it to be presented as a point, then you do 0 comma negative 4. Again, I want you to take note that since we're talking about the y-intercept, the y value is negative 4, but the x value is 0 because it's on the y-axis. All right, graph number two or letter B, where can you can pause this and find which one is the y-intercept. Well, this is my graph B, the blue graph. This is my y-axis. Therefore, this is the y-intercept. And again, that's still 0 comma negative 4 or just negative 4. Okay. Again, the x component of your point is 0. A third graph, where does your wiggly cubic function, the blue graph, crosses the y-axis, is just right there. Okay, so that is 0 comma 11. So therefore, your y-intercept is 11. All right, how about letter D? Your y-intercept is at this point, so therefore that's gonna be 0 comma 10 or just plain 10, again depending on what the question is. The x value is again equal to 0. How about letter E? It only has one y-intercept, and that's that point, and that's 0 comma 0 or just plain 0. Same thing here, it's also 0 comma 0. So now that you have learned how to determine the y-intercept and x-intercept using graph, we will solve this using what if your given problem is an equation, right? But before we do that, just take note that for the y-intercept, the x values are always 0. Okay, so now let's try some problems given um, try some problems given a an equation. Okay, all right, so let's have this first one. Okay, number one. uh, so f of x equals x to the fourth minus 8. Okay. Now remember, when you want to find the y-intercept, the x value is equal to 0. So therefore, you can substitute 0 in your x. So f of 0 equals 0 to the fourth minus 8, or just equal to f of 0 is equal to negative 8. So that means your point is 0 comma negative 8. Therefore, that's your x, that's your y. So therefore, this is your y-intercept, -8. Okay. Now, a second example, y equals x cubed minus 7x squared plus 5. So again, your x is equal to 0, so we can substitute 0. So y equals 0. This is in function notation. This is just a regular y equals equation. Cube minus 7, 0 squared plus 5. So therefore, your y-intercept is equal to 5. So that means your y-intercept is located at 0, comma 5, or your y-intercept is equal to 5 again. Okay. And if you look closely, there's actually a pattern where you don't really need to actually substitute 0. So let's see if you can guess that after our third example. All right, so you have f of x equals x to the fourth minus 16x squared. So again, you want to substitute 0. F of 0 equals 0 to the fourth minus 16 times 0 to the fourth, 0 squared. Okay, so therefore f of 0 equals 0. Therefore, your coordinate of your y-intercept is 0, comma 0. So therefore, your y-intercept is 0. Okay, so there's really a pattern for the y-intercept. It's pretty easy. You don't even have to actually do this substitution. Okay, so look at this one here. Your y-coordinate is -8. That is actually this value right here, the term without anything multiplied with x. Okay, now look at this one here, 5. See that number right there, and this one right here, this you have two terms, this and that, they both have x's, so therefore your y-intercept is equal to 0. Okay, now let's try, I'm gonna give you some random equation here and you tell me without having to substitute what the y-intercept is. Okay, so y equals 1080 x to the fifth minus x to the fourth plus x cubed minus 3. What is the y-intercept? If you said -3, then that would be the correct answer. Yes. All right. How about y equals 4 plus 3x squared plus x? All right. What's the y-intercept? If you answered 4, yes, that's the one. Even though it's the first term, well, that's the only term that doesn't have an x. So you don't get to multiply it with 0. So that's why your y-intercept here is 0. I'm sorry, is equal to 4. Okay, last one. F of x equals 5x to the 1 million plus 3x minus 2x squared. What is your y-intercept? Well, you have three terms, 1, 2, 3, but all of them have x's. So therefore, your y-intercept is going to be equal to 0. Okay, so if you have any more question, drop a comment or send your questions, and I would be glad to solve them for you or work with them for you. See you then.